Does history repeat itself? Is it a recurring circular mess, or a linear line towards a better place? These are significant questions. That certain historical trends and patterns repeat themselves is undeniable. This comes down to the very simple fact that we have innate capacities and tendencies which have remained largely unchanged. Human nature and all its capacities and tendencies lead to certain repetitive trends and patterns developing. Of course, cultural elements also have the potential to create repetitive behaviour. Due to human nature, certain historical repetition concerning often rationally undesirable capacities and arguably tendencies for violence, tribalism, irrationality, authoritarianism, greed, cruelty, and more will continue to manifest. As well as these more negative forces, there are however more positive patterns and trends of innovation, compassion, cooperation, rationality, progress, and more. And these should not be relegated to the shadow of the negative aspects and ignored. History has at least something of a circular and repetitive capacity, or even tendency, due to a largely unchanging human nature and all of its many capacities and tendencies. So long as people are subject to similar situations and have similar innate capacities and tendencies, they will act in line with certain patterns and trends to some extent. Obviously, such matters are enormously complicated. One of the reasons that we study history is so we can understand certain patterns and trends. The study of history would not be anywhere near as important if we did not believe that there are certain unchanging innate capacities and tendencies within us, which continue to give rise to similar behaviour and the repetition of history. How people have behaved in the past is often studied with the goal of understanding how we will act in the present. Central to this idea is the assumption that we have certain innate and unchanging tendencies and capacities, which give rise to certain trends and patterns of behaviour, at least to some extent. Our unchanging capacities and tendencies certainly give history a circular element, at least a capacity to be circular, perhaps even a tendency. One of our internal capacities, tendencies even, is the capacity to learn, and perhaps that includes learning from history and our many historical mistakes. Or perhaps not. As for the idea that history represents a linear progression towards a better place, this idea seems somewhat idiotic. If history is a moral progression, we haven't made a great deal of progress. Humans have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and the Holocaust is less than 100 years behind us. Clearly there is no continuous linear progress in the moral sense. There are many peaks and valleys. Of course, our current society exhibits various improvements. This does not, however, indicate an inevitable progression. The improvements that we currently enjoy could all be swept away in a moment. Various times in history have exhibited improvements and accomplishments that have been swept away in an instant. I think that history can be a relatively linear progression, but only if we force it to be such, with all our might. And even then, there will be dips and dives along the way. The march uphill is not a steady ascent so much as it is a mixture of large ascents and small yet notable descents. History is not naturally a linear progression. We have to ensure that it is. Progress does not naturally occur. Progress must be aggressively fought for and relentlessly maintained. It does not happen naturally, and it being achieved does not guarantee its longevity. Progress is often difficult to win, and even once won, it can and will be killed if we do not defend it. Positive progress is irrationally desirable. It is worth fighting for, and it is something we must fight for. But it is not natural or inevitable. The idea of linear history is dangerous because it acts like progress is guaranteed when it is not. It also pretends progress is permanent when it can be undone in a second. History is not linear, at least not inherently, but perhaps we can make it so. History is neither inherently linear or circular. It has the capacity to be both, and ultimately it will be what we make of it. We must be cautious that we do not adopt a pessimistic view of circular history, and in doing so create a self-fulfilling prophecy and seal our fates. Our unchanging natural capacities and tendencies give history a capacity, and sometimes tendency, to be circular. But those same natural capacities also give it a capacity and tendency to be a linear progression. Those natural capacities and tendencies include rationality, compassion, cooperation, and innovation, after all. Human nature gives history both circular repetitive elements and the potential for linear progression towards a better world. Human nature gives us many capacities and tendencies that make both repetitive circular history and linear progressive history into possibilities. And both things are virtually guaranteed to materialize to some extent. There will always be some drive for progress and some drive for circularity. We have capacities and tendencies for both things. It is just a matter of which one wins. Our circular tendencies mean the occasional dip is guaranteed, even if we put all our might behind a linear progression. But the rational actor will seek to make history a linear progression, at least the closest thing to a linear progression that it can be. People are complicated. Human nature is complicated. Society is complicated. And history is complicated. These are enormously complex philosophical issues. They are issues that we would be wise to ponder. I hope you enjoyed my rambling. If you have any thoughts, I would love to hear them.